I found out my wife cheated on me with her ex. I lost control and slept with her mom. If this story resonates with you, subscribe to the channel and share in the comments which city you're watching from. We'd love to know where our community is growing. There's a reason they say you should never tolerate exes still being in your partner's life. I've had to learn that firsthand. It doesn't matter how much a woman wants to tell you that the ex is still there just because they're not enemies and had an amicable breakup. Don't listen. An ex should be a thing of the past. And if there's still an ex in the picture, it's because they're not really up to anything good. Well, I was a fool. I'll admit it. She didn't brag about her ex or how they kept in touch, but sometimes I find out he wished her a happy birthday or asked about her. This didn't happen monthly. It happened more like every 3 or 4 months. And according to her, their conversations were always brief. I got so worried about things at one point that I decided to check for myself. I took her phone and checked her messages when she wasn't around. And to be honest, I found I didn't talk about much. He was still in the picture, but I was just tired of having discussions about her ex, so I simply decided to let it go. That's where I was a fool. I should have never done that. I should have ended it from the start. I've had exes myself who I broke up with amicably, though I don't talk to them anymore. So I tried to give my wife the benefit of the doubt. Again, I was a fool. I know. We've been married 8 years, so you can't blame me for thinking that was more than enough time for her to be way over her ex. We have a child together. We should be a real family. There shouldn't be time for this kind of foolishness this woman was up to. At least that's what I think. She clearly had a very different opinion than mine. I've no objections to checking a woman's phone. By nature, I don't think you should trust them. If they get to a point where you can start to trust them, then great. But if you're starting a romantic relationship, you should start with scrutiny and skepticism. That's how I started with my wife, and it worked for the most part. It was all the trust I developed that made me drop my guard. And I don't need to say again that I know I was a fool for that. One day, she was talking to me and accidentally called me Travis. That's her ex's name. She realized it and knew I'd heard it too, but she tried to claim it wasn't what I thought and that nothing was going on. I told her I didn't believe her because that wasn't the kind of name that should be on the tip of her tongue. Sometimes I called other people by my wife's name, and that's because hers is the name I say most often. Sometimes it just slips out, but there's no way in the world I'd accidentally call her by my college girlfriend's name when I barely think about her and haven't talked to her in years. That's what she did, and she was trying to treat me like a fool. We ended up having a massive argument. I told her she was thinking about him too much. She kept swearing her innocence and saying I was crucifying her for something that was totally unintentional. Finally, when we finished yelling at each other, I told her to stop talking to Travis. Period. I let that nonsense go on long enough. If our marriage meant anything to her, then she'd have no problem letting go of an ex who was so far in her past and a person she only talked to a few times a year. I could see her hesitation, but she agreed because she had no other choice. If she decided to fight that compromise, it'd make me question why she didn't want to stop talking to the guy when there was really no reason to keep doing it. She left it at that, and I walked away. The problem is the subject kept nagging at me. I knew something wasn't right about their relationship, and I wasn't going to be able to completely get it out of my mind. I know how women work, and I'm not going to listen to my wife call me her ex's name and just let it slide. She'd already shown me she wasn't going to tell me the truth, whatever it was, so I had no choice but to find things out for myself. I was going to check her phone. Again, I'm not dumb, and she also knew that after the argument we had, if she had a brain, she would have purged any messages with the guy that weren't appropriate. That's what I saw when I finally checked her messages. It looked like they hadn't talked in the last 6 months, and the messages that were there were totally platonic. However, I wasn't convinced. She was smart enough to delete her texts, but she completely neglected her call log, and that's where I caught her. She talked to Travis 3 times in the last 2 weeks. I instantly knew something was up because she swore they hadn't talked in ages. The calls weren't from him to her, they were from her to him. She was the one seeking him out. Also, this was before our argument, which made even more sense of the fact that his name slipped from her tongue. I took a photo of that with the dates and times logged and left it at that. I decided I was going to let her dig herself a deeper hole. So I went to her ready to start a fight with my phone recording. I asked my wife when she'd last spoken to Travis, and she looked at me annoyed. Not this again. Are you serious? I told her I was serious and that I didn't feel at ease about that time she called me by his name. She repeated this time on record that she hadn't spoken to the guy in several months, which matched her text messages, but I knew the truth. I wasn't going to show all my cards at that moment. I kept fighting a bit more, claiming I didn't believe her, and she offered to show me her phone, so I let her. After that, I had to play dumb and let her strut around with her supposed moral superiority. She knew she was lying, but she seemed to enjoy acting as if she was much better than me because I'd given her the opportunity myself. I let her enjoy it because I knew the truth. At that point, I decided to take matters into my own hands. With Travis's phone number and name, it was easy for me to pay a private investigator for more info on him. I found out his full name, where he worked, and the house he lived in. This last part was what I needed most. I know this part was incredibly reckless, but I'm an impulsive person. I decided to confront the guy. I went to his house after office hours and was lucky enough to find him coming home from work. I got his attention. The moment he saw me, he knew who I was. I wasn't surprised. He was basically my wife's lover. It seemed he knew she was married, and I knew he'd recognize me. He looked like he wanted to run away, but I told him to stay put because I had to talk to him. He actually listened. I told him I wasn't going to be violent if he cooperated with me. He's more or less my age, but he's a smaller guy and has a somewhat nerdy look to him. He wasn't going to want things to get physical if he could avoid it, because I go to the gym, so it wasn't going to end well for him. I told him I knew about him and my wife, and that it'd be best for him not to deny it. I was recording the entire encounter and asked him to confirm they'd been in regular contact. He nodded. I asked him if they'd been sleeping together, and though he paused, he nodded. I asked how many times they'd slept together. He said he didn't know. I ordered him to give me an answer. He thought about it for a moment and said at least 7 times. I just shook my head at that. I asked him when it had started, and he told me it was that same year. We were in July at that time. I asked him why he couldn't just stay out of it. He shook his head quickly and asked, "Did she say I started this?" I swear it wasn't like that. She called me. I knew he was right about that, but it was gratifying to see him throw her under the bus. I asked him why he couldn't just say no. He took a long time to answer and finally said he missed her. And that was it. He knew he shouldn't have had anything to do with her because she was married, but he messed up in that aspect, and he was sorry. I told him he didn't need to apologize. I was going to make sure he could have my wife all to himself if he wanted, because things between us were going to end. He seemed surprised to hear that, but then he gave me the impression he's the type of man who'd take back a cheating woman. I told him I needed only one thing from him to keep his mouth shut. I warned him that if he told her I knew, I'd not only come back to hurt him, but I'd hurt her too. I was acting like a bully, so I think he was convinced I was capable of it. I asked him to confirm he'd keep the secret. He thought about it and nodded. I nodded back, repeating that at the end of the day, he could have the cheater if he just played his part, because I didn't want to hurt anyone, but I wasn't afraid to either. Now I had confirmation. I know for certain this woman's been cheating on me. I've already met with the divorce lawyer, because clearly there's no hope for us anymore. Our son's going to be in the middle of all this, but that's how things are sometimes. I'm not going to subject the poor kid to the torture of a home where everyone hates each other. I'll eventually find a way to rebuild my life as a single dad, but now the priority is to get away from my wife. She's not good for me, and I'm afraid if I stay around her, I'll end up becoming the kind of person I'll regret being. I've very little patience for infidelity, and I'd prefer that not to manifest in its full extent. She wasn't confused. It wasn't a misunderstanding. She was playing both sides and got careless. Update 1. I'm back, and with what I consider a pretty considerable update. Before I say anything about what's happened, I need everyone to understand that I don't necessarily consider myself a good person. I'll never try to harm another person unless they harm me first. And that's precisely why I decided to go as far as I did. My wife crossed the line first, and there's no reason she should be able to choose how I react after that. My wife's father died before we met, so it's always just been her mother. Her mother had her when she was quite young, so she herself is young at least to be a grandmother. I've always thought she looks good because she's an older version of the woman I married. Of course, I'm sensible and loyal enough to keep my hands to myself, so I never crossed the line. I can't say the same for her mom. There were many times when I felt her mother was trying to throw hints my way. The point is those innuendos stayed on the edge of a young mom being a bit too playful. There was plausible deniability involved, and that was the problem. I mentioned it to my wife on a few occasions during the first year after we started dating, but she didn't seem to have a major problem with it. Only occasionally did she agree her mom went too far. When we married, that ceased for the most part. However, I noticed she tried to be seductive from afar if we were alone. If I went to her house to pick something up, she always wore something inappropriate, though not overly suggestive, and she'd happen to bend over and get into positions I assumed were meant to turn me on. I never took the bait because I'm not a dog. This time I decided to bite. My wife had no idea I knew about her and Travis. It seemed he'd been a good boy and hadn't really told her anything about our encounter, which pleasantly surprised me. That meant I was going to be able to hit my wife hard, and I chose her mom as the way to do it. I made up an excuse to go see her mother to pick something up, and this time I knew I was going to let things happen. When I got there, it was the usual. Her mom opened the door in a tight t-shirt with nothing underneath. I wasn't going to be able to find out until I made the first move. She'd stopped being as flirtatious as before, so I knew I'd have to be the one to take the initiative. I told her she looked especially good, and she liked hearing that from me. It wasn't something I usually said, so she came up to me to give me a hug for the compliment. She held me for a long time, and I didn't try to pull away. I let my hands slide down when I noticed there was no resistance. I grabbed her, but for a few seconds. She still did nothing, so I broke away and quickly apologized, but she said I didn't need to, and that's when I knew it was going to be easy. I asked her if she had anything to drink, and she said she only had beers. So we had a few on the couch as she snuggled closer and closer to me. And once I knew we were firmly in inappropriate territory, I made my move. I slid my hand under her t-shirt and kissed her. She didn't stop me. She let it happen. She didn't seem to hesitate at any point. It was very easy for things to reach the final point. From there, we went full on into intense kissing, and then I screwed her right there on the couch where we'd been snuggling. She loved it, and for me, that made it even better. I told her I had to leave, and she asked me why I couldn't stay longer. I told her I had to go back to my wife. She simply nodded. There were no regrets, which I found crazy. She said I could drop by whenever I wanted, which I found even wilder. As much as I would have liked to continue with her, I knew any chance of that would evaporate after my confrontation. I made sure to do it immediately as the divorce lawyer was ready to act. I went into the house. She asked me what took me so long, and I told her directly that I'd screwed her mother, and that's why I'd taken so long. She said it wasn't a funny joke. I told her I wasn't kidding. I told her I knew about Travis and that sleeping with her mother was my way of getting revenge. I told her it had even been better than sleeping with her. She just stared at me. She wasn't sure if I was telling some kind of dark joke. "If you're joking, it's not funny," she said. I repeated that I wasn't joking and pointed out that she didn't want to address the fact that I knew about her and Travis. Slowly, she started to process it. She knew I knew about her cheating and then realized that if I knew, I probably wasn't lying about her mother. She started hyperventilating and couldn't take her eyes off me. She asked me to tell her the truth, and I told her it was true because she could call her mother and ask her. She looked at her phone as if considering it, but didn't make the move. "Why would you do that to me?" I asked her the exact same question. She'd slept with her ex several times. I'd slept with her mother once. I asked her why she thought mine was worse. She couldn't say anything to that. I told her that if her mother didn't care, I'd continue with our thing, especially since I was benevolent enough to give her and Travis my blessing. She simply started to cry. At that moment, I laughed. I don't know where it came from, but it was a really cruel laugh. It felt good. I never thought I'd look at the woman I consider the love of my life and feel so happy to see her suffer. But life hits you fast. I was radiant with joy. "What about our son? What about me?" she asked. I told her our son would be fine, but that he was an unfortunate victim of her actions. She tried to say my actions had contributed too, but I pointed out that I'd never have slept with her mother. She winced in pain. If she hadn't cheated on me first, she claimed I'd destroyed her happiness, and I could only shrug. I told her there was a lot of happiness in the world, but it wouldn't be with me. She was truly shattered, and after a while I decided not to stay there anymore. I left the house. I told her I was going to stay with her mother, but I only said it to enrage her more. I was going to sleep in a hotel. I'm sure she talked to her mother, and they both had a fight. Her mother sent me a calmly worded message the next morning telling me she didn't appreciate being used that way. I told her I wasn't using her. I simply had an excuse to finally make things happen. She didn't reply to that, and I know it's because she's open to it happening again. Even with the full picture, I'm not surprised. I ended up seeing her again, even though she was angry that didn't stop what happened. Staying present in her mother's life will be my continuous revenge. The relationship between them won't survive this. My wife's already been notified of the divorce. She's still in the house with our son, and I went to see him. Obviously, my wife tries to stop me, but she knows I'm not the kind of person you can mess with. We'll eventually divorce, and I hope custody will be split equally. That's the most likely scenario. She's been miserable, and that shows in her social media posts. She tries to put up posts about depression, but nobody cares. She tries to act like she's having fun in clubs, but again, nobody cares. She's putting on a show to hide her pain, and I'm pleased to know how much I've affected her. This is damage she won't be able to recover from. If Travis wants her, he can have her, but I'll never stoop to the level of staying with a cheating witch. Her calling you her ex's name wasn't a slip. That's what happens when someone's juggling two realities and starts getting sloppy. You don't secretly call someone you're supposedly over several times and then lie about it unless you've already decided your partner's trust is expendable. So she did receive consequences she didn't see coming. And suddenly the same person who had no problem lying to your face is shattered and confused. It's funny how honesty only mattered once she lost control of the situation. At the end of the day, she gambled her whole life, her marriage, her stability, and her family for something temporary and secret and lost. That's her responsibility. Update 2. It's been a while since my last post, and things have progressed exactly as I planned, or even better. The divorce process was a bloodbath for my ex-wife. Thanks to the recordings I got from Travis confessing the infidelity and the call log she herself couldn't deny, my lawyer managed to get the judge to see reality. She was the one who destroyed the home's stability. I benefited in the asset division. I managed to keep the main house, and joint custody was established on my terms. She had to move to a small apartment, a direct blow to her ego and the lifestyle she was used to. But the real victory didn't happen in court, but in her own mother's bedroom. The relationship between my ex-wife and her mom is completely dead. They yelled everything at each other, blocked each other, and as far as I know, my ex-wife called her a traitor and sick. Her mother didn't care. In fact, it seems that not having to hide from my ex has made her more open with me. Last night, while my ex was on her night shift, working to pay off her debts, I was at her mother's house. We were lying down relaxed after our thing, and I decided it was time to deliver the final blow. I took out my phone and took a picture of us, nothing explicit that could be used against me legally, but intimate enough so there was no doubt where I was and with whom. I sent it to her via text with a caption that said, "Your mother cooks much better than you, and that's not the only thing she does better." I saw the message was read almost instantly. There was no written response, just a series of missed calls that I ignored while turning off my cell phone. You can imagine her shattered in her small apartment, realizing she didn't just lose her husband and her home, but now every time she thinks of her mother, she'll see my face. This is the consequence of playing with the trust of someone who's not afraid to get their hands dirty. My revenge isn't over, it's just becoming a habit. Update 3. I thought the story ended with my last update, but life has a very twisted way of putting everyone in their place. My ex-wife decided to try and rebuild her life with Travis, the guy she cheated on me with. At first, she tried to rub it in my face on social media, acting as if she'd found the love of her life, but the facade fell faster than expected. It turns out Travis wasn't the good nerdy guy he pretended to be in front of me when I confronted him. With my ex-wife, he showed his true colors, an extremely jealous, controlling, and violent guy. A few days ago, the situation exploded. Neighbors heard heartbreaking screams and dull thuds that lasted for hours. They called the police just in time. When officers broke down the door, they found Travis out of control and my ex on the floor, almost dead after a brutal beating that left her unrecognizable. Travis was arrested on the spot, but the story didn't end there. While processing him, the police discovered he had a hidden history and was linked to a series of large-scale robberies in the area. Between aggravated assault and his robbery crimes, he's facing many years behind bars. The ideal lover turned out to be a violent criminal. My ex ended up in the hospital with multiple fractures and a long recovery process ahead. My reaction, none. I feel no pity. I feel no hatred. I simply don't care. Where her relatives tried to call me to go see her, I just hung up. She chose that path the day she decided her marriage was worthless. As for me, I've decided to end my affair with her mother. It was a useful tool for my revenge, and I admit there was fire, but it served its purpose. I don't want more drama or more mind games. I've cut ties with that toxic circle at the root. Now my only focus is my son. He's the only pure thing left of this whole mess. I'm dedicated to being the father he deserves, giving him the stability and love his mother didn't know how to value. My revenge is complete. Karma did the rest of the work, and finally, after so much chaos, I've found peace in my own space. After this ending, do you think the protagonist went too far, or did karma simply finish the job he started? Some say revenge is never good, but others will say the mother was the masterstroke. What would you have done in his place upon discovering the lover was a criminal? I'll read you down here in the comments.